Hey everybody, Michael Snyder here, Pacific Northwest Weather Watch. Today is December 14th, and first things first, I want to address the snowfall potential here across Pacific Northwest. You're probably seeing the news talk about it, social media, snow maps out there. We still are technically in Fantasyland, folks. We have some model disagreement we need to work through. That being said, there is some high-end snowfall potential here across Pacific Northwest with these systems coming through next week. You can see right now we've got some snow falling across eastern Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana. Some winter weather advisories are in effect. That will be ending from northwest to southeast, but it is below freezing out there, so anything that falls will coat the roadway and be pretty slick. Taking a look here at this visible/infrared satellite imagery, you can see the cutoff low over the Pacific Ocean. Here goes Washington, Oregon there. Here goes our energy. It's going to start riding over the top of this ridge. Some Arctic air is going to move down into British Columbia here, and big model disagreement on how that Arctic air is going to interact with the Pacific Ocean and what kind of systems are moving across Pacific Northwest. We'll take a look at that in some great detail here in a moment. Looking off for eastern Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana here, you can see 1 to 3 inches generally. Local amounts up to 4 inches, but it is below freezing, can be disruptive in just low amounts. Slick roadways, heads up for that off to the east here. Now you can see we're going to look at what's coming the next couple days briefly here. You can see the offshore winds developing as we go on in through Wednesday night, Thursday morning, Friday, maybe some sunshine Thursday and Friday across the region. Enjoy it while it lasts with some nice offshore winds coming through the Fraser River Gap, the Stampede Gap, and the gorge down there on the Washington-Oregon border. As we go on into Saturday, you can see this onshore flow start to return here. Some Arctic air sagging south across BC. More on that here in a moment. Taking a look here, we are dealing with some pretty chilly temperatures before this Arctic air is even arriving. You can see some of these overnight lows into eastern Washington, Oregon, down to the single digits here. BC, Idaho, Montana, very cold east of the mountains here, and even some overnight freezing here as you go through the Willamette Valley and Puget Sound. So heads up for some black ice there, especially on in through Thursday and Friday morning here. And now as we go on in, here we go to Friday afternoon. You can see that Arctic air start to sag south across British Columbia here on last night's European run. Pretty cold air setting up shop there. And now we're going to start to look at how this is going to interact with the Pacific Northwest. European on the left, GFS on the right, 850 millibars, 5,000 feet. This is key to the trajectory of this cold air as it moves off the BC coast back into western Washington and Oregon to see how much snowfall we have the potential to get. You can see pretty good model agreement here between the GFS on the right, European on the left. But look at the European, brings much colder air out off the continent here back into the Pacific Northwest. GFS keeps it bottled up over the interior BC here. We would get much less of a dynamic system across western Washington, western Oregon in this scenario shown on the GFS on the right. And look at the European, just brings the hammer down in multiple systems here across Pacific Northwest. Very dynamic snowfall systems would occur with such a setup here, but we don't know exactly the extent of this very cold air moving down. But there is going to be a battleground between some warmer Pacific Ocean air and the Arctic air to the north, according to the European there. GFS starts to kick this Arctic air out much quicker versus the European shown here as we're now moving into December 22nd here on the weather maps. And then, as you can see on the left here, that Arctic air hanging around on the European, where it's just almost totally gone out of British Columbia here by the night in the early morning of Friday, December 23rd here. Now, taking a look, European on the left, GFS on the right, wider view of things, Alaska, BC, Washington, Oregon. Here we go, 500 millibars, 18,000 feet, general ridge and trough position. There goes our Arctic area moving down the backside of this ridge in towards British Columbia here. And now you can see these big differences emerge. Look at the GFS much further north here with this lobe of Arctic air here versus the European, which then swings this lobe down across the Pacific Northwest here, while the GFS wants nothing to do with that. This is much warmer here across Puget Sound, Willamette Valley, western portion. Still could get some snowfall through southwest BC in a scenario like this, but big differences showing up in the model runs there. So we just compared the European versus the GFS. Now let's compare the GFS versus itself. Hot off the presses on the left here, 12Z versus last night's 06Z run. Put this into motion. You can see the ridge allowing this cold air to move down into British Columbia here. Go on in towards Sunday afternoon, and you can see the lobe is developing stronger here on the GFS. Go towards Tuesday afternoon here, and you can clearly see the colder air making it further south, trending towards what the European is saying, giving confidence to what the European is calling for here coming up. So good news for snow lovers so far. Let's continue to watch this today to see if this continues to trend towards the direction of the European. Now let's look at the European on the left and the Canadian on the right. This is last night's run. Since there was such disagreement between the European European and the GFS. I like to bring the Canadian into it. And now watch this. You see pretty good agreement here between the Canadian and the European. And you look at these lobes going to open up right on the west coast of BC here. Pretty favorable for some snowfall getting down west of the Cascades at this point. So it looked like the last night's GFS one was probably an outlier as it trended towards what the Canadian and the European are saying as of last night. Now looking here, this is the Canadian here, 850 millibars, 5,000 feet. Look at this Arctic air blast down into BC here. Hangs up for a moment, starts off shoreline here, and then wraps around back into western Washington and Oregon here. So probably a pretty dynamic system as this cold air interacts with the Pacific Ocean here as we go through Monday and Tuesday. We'll continue to watch that day by day. We're not going to get too caught up in details just yet. We're still trying to get these models in order. Taking a look here, the European 700 millibars, 10,000 feet. Thought you might like to see this polar lobe drop down into British Columbia here. Look at the extent of this cold air drop down into British Columbia, swing back across Washington and Oregon at this point, just dominating Northwest North America by the time we get into Tuesday night of next week. Now taking a look here, 850 millibar winds here. You can see the offshore winds for the couple days here. Then you can clearly see the Arctic air starts to march down there, comes off the shoreline here, and the European of last night really just takes some nice trajectories with this cold air over the Pacific Ocean, picks up just enough moisture, develops systems, and deposits them back across western Washington, Oregon, bringing strong fronts across the region here, and then even a more powerful storm in through the extended shown here. But we're not going to get too caught up in those details yet, but there are definitely some interesting solutions as you look off into the extended of last night's European run. This is 850 millibar actual temperatures here in Celsius here. You can see the polar lobe drop down across BC, come off the coastline and really bring this cold air back into western Washington and Oregon here as we go in through early next week. Let's see if these models continue to trend with this kind of pattern, because there is the potential for some very dynamic snowfalls west of the Cascades underneath such a synoptic setup. Now taking a look here, this is the European map of last night as well. Let's go ahead and play out. You can see that disturbance move through this morning, by the way, off to the east. Now we go dry for a few days. Arctic front starts to move down. You can see some convergence zone activity starting up here by Sunday night across western Washington. And you can see a pretty good swath of moisture moving in here, interacting with some of this Arctic air here. Potential for some heavy snowfall on the north side of this. At that point, strong front moves across Pacific Northwest. Another system interacts with this Arctic air here, moving on the south side of that Arctic high into western Washington here, bringing another good snowfall, and then the potential grand finale there towards the end of the week here, if you believe last night's European run. Potential ice, snow, all kinds of nasty stuff here as we go through December 23rd. So we'll continue to watch this day by day here, but some pretty interesting solutions showing up in the European. Now I want to show you just how dry this Arctic air mass coming down out of the north is. Look at this dry air coming down across the area, and almost an atmospheric river-like feature here interacting with it. So it could be some very heavy snowfalls on the north side of this if this were to verify. First system moves through, another system then moves through as you go through Tuesday night into Wednesday, and then a much more dynamic system here towards the end of the week, possibly there. And you can see the battle between the very dry Arctic air to the north and the much more moist Pacific air to the south there. Could be a very interesting battleground where these air masses meet. Taking a look here, 10 to 1 snow ratio. This is purely for fantasy right now, but this is probably the stuff you're going to see over the next few days here on some of the social media sites that you're watching. And look at some of these snowfalls across western Washington, Oregon. And don't get worried if you're up in southwest BC. You could easily be included in this activity here as well. We just don't know where these boundaries of these systems are going to set up just yet. It's purely fantasy at this point, but we do have some interesting solutions showing up. Now, this is 2-meter temperature anomaly on yesterday's European run. You can see how we're pretty well below average as we move the next couple of days here, and then that Arctic air arrives here and just kind of sags south across British Columbia. Look at some of these temperatures, 50 below Fahrenheit average across portions of British Columbia, getting down into Washington too. And you can kind of see that cutoff where this battleground's going to set up here across the region. And then look at this, by the time we get off into the extended, very cold air still entrenched over BC, and some very warm Pacific air would be a very intense battleground here right across the middle of that. But again, it's still fantasy at this point. Now looking at Seattle Tacoma on the European ensemble runs. This is not the ensemble, this is the deterministic here, but you can see we really fall off a cliff here as we go through next week according to the European model. This is for Spokane. Look at some temperatures down towards zero are possible here coming up as we go through early and mid next week. This is the GFS. You can see how it backed off its very cold temperatures of a few days ago, but I have a hunch it's going to start back trending back down again a bit here as we go. This is last night's run. Still pretty chilly for Seattle, but not as cold as it was showing. And this shows you the uncertainty we are dealing with here. You see these smatterings of big snowfalls intermixed here, including the control run, versus some of these runs not giving Seattle any snowfall at all or very light amounts. So kind of take this into account here when you're watching these snow maps come in here for the next few days. Now look at Spokane. You can see these blue bars as they increase. That's the confidence of the forecast decreasing rapidly. You can see the big swings in potential temperatures, even for places east of the Cascades here. As these Pacific systems move in, they'll be interacting with, each run is going to show different interactions here. And you can kind of see that highlighted here in some of these forecasts. Although there is pretty good agreement, it is still going to get pretty darn cold here east of the mountains as we go through Wednesday night into Thursday. This is for Kamloops, interior BC, and even a few ensemble members don't have it getting that cold in the interior there, but for the most part there is very good agreement for that very cold air setting up shop there across the interior of BC. Now looking at Pendleton, you can see they're going to be near that battleground of warm and cold air, and that reflects here in some of the ensemble members of the European run here, some into the 30s and 40s, some into the teens and single digits and even negative territory here. And you can see as these blue lines get bigger here, we have less certainty in the forecast as we go on into the extended. This really starts to show itself as you get on in towards Monday and Tuesday here. Snohomish County, again, you can see the bars increase as we get towards Monday. Some areas, some of these ensembles have 40s. Some of them have single digits. What to believe at this point? Lots to work out still, folks. Bellingham, similar. Even some warmer temperatures showing up for Bellingham too, as well as some teens and single digits there. And this is National Weather Service risk of hazardous temperatures here. Does show high, including Portland here as we go on in through later in December. So we'll watch this kind of interesting experimental product here from the National Weather Service. And of course, this 10-day temperature outlook. The further you go east, the better chances for those extreme colds. But their confidence is a little bit low right now because they don't know just the interaction here between some of these systems and the Arctic air setting up over BC. So anyway, yeah, lots to talk about here over the next few days. I'll be doing a live stream at some point tomorrow along with a regular briefing. I am off work tomorrow. I have to work tonight, so I'll go in there and, I'll probably be hearing about all the snow hype going on here since the news and the social media places are all talking about it here. So anyway, thanks to all my new subscribers, new members. We're going to do this all again tomorrow. Try to get some more consistency, especially between the GFS and the European on just what kind of systems are going to impact us here. And otherwise, have a good day, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.